Hi everyone, welcome to a chill walkthrough video of the bouncing ball slash spinning head video I made on YouTube. I'm going to be focusing on my two favourite sections in this video, and I had about 4 hours of footage for this that I've then cut down to get to the most important parts. So we're just going to focus on the girl and space cat. So I used the bouncing ball as the base template for this. And once I was happy with that, I then made another layer and I made the guide slash grid for the face. And it's usually helpful to have a design in place before you start. So I was really winging it with these, and I actually just had the idea for these two. I wanted them to be a girl with hair that I could animate, some nice secondary motion, and I wanted a cat because I thought it would look cool. That's the very deep emotional drive behind these designs. So I do a lot of flipping, and the guide helped a lot. Even if it's just a cross on the ball like this, you can get the volume and make it look 3D, and you can figure out the placement of the eyes or main features that you want to add. So I placed mine on the line, like the horizontal line on the guide, and then the center crosshair was where the nose would start, and that helped a lot. So I get a lot of questions about how I became so confident or get my animations so smooth and consistent, and a lot of the time it is literally just spending hours on the design and flipping back and forth. Flipping has saved my life many a time, and you'll see it in this process, but I go through several sections, like especially the chin and the area on the nose, where I just erase everything many times. And this hair, like this fringe, gave me so much trouble because I had to design the character and then decide on the volume, and as the head turns, it's quite a lot of angles and perspective, which I want to get better at. And most of the time you can kind of wing it and fudge it and make it up as you go along. Most of the time I will see it and I'll be like, that looks right, that looks good to me, and then I move on. And that's good enough for me, because a lot of the stuff that I've been practicing or making never actually gets to YouTube, and it never gets to behind the scenes on Patreon or YouTube members, because I'm not happy with it. I'm trying to put away the idea that everything has to be perfect. I've always really appreciated it when people were honest and open and showed the bad days as well. On social media, there's a tendency to only show the good stuff. So I do try and be a bit more realistic with that. And I think these videos, you can see how much I just scribble over stuff or remove it and then start again. So I'm starting to add in the extra details, like the hair loops. You can see I'm erasing them now. I wanted them to have a little bit of weight, but also drag when the character's head turns. So I finished the rough animation for the girl head turn, and I left a couple of frames either side of the ball bounce, like where they hit the floor, that would be empty of design. So it would hit the floor, and then as it comes back up, the design would switch, and it made for a really nice transition. So the way I structured these shots, I had 3 separate sections, or 3 duplicated shots for my different heads. And that just allowed me to make a new layer and new guide for each bounce. So there was a bit of variation as the design changed in what direction the characters would move. So when I'm animating anything, I start off with the basic shapes. So the first thing I drew for this cat was the circle where the face would be. I kind of imagined they'd be in a little spacesuit with only the ears and the legs poking out. I kept it very simple because I realized when I started adding the designs for the heads, as you can see, the arc that I added in for the ball bounce is very close to the top of the canvas, so it didn't leave me a lot of room. And what I could have done was increase the canvas size and like reshuffled everything around, but I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be persistent and very stubborn and carry on. So the cat was actually upside down in this one, which I think looks cool. And once the face circle was done, I then started adding in the ears, which, as you can see, I'm erasing a lot of it. I had quite a bit of trouble with these as well. So a hack, which I really should use more, is to draw a single circle for the shape and proportion that I want to use. and then I just stamped it in place in the direction I wanted to use it. It made things so much more consistent, and basically I used this as the base, and then of course just flipping back and forth to make sure that the position is right and that it doesn't slide about on the character's head. And then I decided to draw out the eyes and stamp them in again. I just was using the brush transform tool in TV Paint to rotate the eyes and paste them in as I went. And honestly, I'd love a mix of TV Paint and Blender. So the coloring from TV Paint, fantastic, put that in. The timeline from TV Paint and the features to get little previews of what the frames look like, put that into Blender. Or basically the vector stuff, the being able to draw outside the canvas, the easier 3D camera, put that all in TV Paint and we're golden, honestly. And I love this tiny little rotating feature in the bottom right. It's by the percentage that shows how much you're zoomed in and out. And it allows you to rotate your canvas like you would with a traditional circle board that the old 2D animators used to use. I also love being able to create brushes super easily and cut out sections from my drawing and stamp them into place. Again, to keep things consistent, I used this same technique with the little antenna I decided to include on the top of the cat. And then I started on adding tiny little eyebrows, which made the cat look so angry. And then I added in the mouth. I definitely think sectioning out your animation like this makes things so much more manageable and easier. And then it was time to add the feet. And again, I struggled with these because there was 4 of them. It was rotating in perspective. You had to keep things consistent in shape and volume. As you can see here, it was a little bit of a struggle, because the feet were pointing up and they were very close to the top of the canvas. In the final renders and exports, I actually exported the animations and then shrunk them down slightly so there was a bit more of a gap between the top of the animation and the end of the canvas. At one point I was going to add a tail to the cat, but then I decided not to do that. It would have been an extra step to cover up or like include a smear to get the tail to disappear at the right time for the bounce on each side, so I left that off. So basically the cat suit is completely consuming him and he only has like little holes for his ears, his face and his feet. So there may or may not be a cat tail in there somewhere. And then once I was happy with the rough animation, it was time to colour. I did different versions or styles of colouring for each of the designs. So these 2 were lineless styles, so I lowered the opacity of the rough layers and then I made new ones over the top with a flat colour base that I would then add as I went along. So I did the largest area first, which was the skin. And I was just using the fill tool with this. I really could have used the CTG layer in TV Paint Pro because it is so much easier to just draw a line and then highlight the frames and then fill it in. I decided I was going to go with the fill tool because when I get questions about how to colour or like how I finish something off, a lot of people are like, what's a CTG layer? My program doesn't do that. So for this beginner video, I was like, just use the fill tool. I believe every animation program at least has something similar. So the lineless style is something I'd like to do more of. I think it's very forgiving with proportions and consistency. It definitely looks a lot better, like you've put a lot more effort in, especially if you add those little line details and some texture on top like I did with this one. And the effect is just really, really nice. I find colouring to be very chill, and it's something I can just put a podcast on or a playlist and just completely zone out and just focus on making something look pretty. For me, adding texture and colour to an animation is definitely one of my favourite parts, which honestly changes with each project that I do, because sometimes a project will go well and I'll be like, wow, I really love animation. And then the next project I do will be like, I hate this so much. It's not always perfect or a picnic. And when I'm really hating something, I will try and take a step back, do something else. Because I am very stubborn, I will try and like force myself to finish something. With digital art, it's something that I can come back to or undo. With traditional, which I haven't really touched in a while, though I want to get back to it, I force myself through it and I end up ruining what I'm doing. So digital is very forgiving that way. When I was at uni, I was so frustrated that I would draw all these frames and I would put it through the line tester. And it was only really until then that I figured something was off, or I could see a mistake, or this bit wobbled. And this was my first year. I'd only been studying for like one month, 2 months. And I was like, that's it, I'm going digital and nothing else. Which now looking back, I find really odd, because I was actually pretty good at stop motion. I really enjoyed it. I don't know whether it was because I had like a physical puppet to pose and I could visualize the animation that way. So usually I have the palette on the side of like my go-to colors. These are just colors that I found that I liked, or they are from previous freelance projects that I've color picked and put in this collection. They're not all in order, but I was like, oh, this is a nice shade. This is a really good red. I wanted them to be kind of limited. I didn't want anything too complicated. What I could have done was I could have animated the eyes or the mouth or made the little paws wriggle. If I had a longer loop or the bounce from side to side was slower, I probably could have done this. With a liner style like this, when you have multiple elements that are the same color, you kind of want a detail line to split it up and help define the shapes so you can see where everything is, rather than it just being one single coloured blob. Finally, I had finished the line work on the cat, the bouncing cat, and I was really pleased with that. I loved how these two turned out. So it was time to add in the line work and shadow on the girl. So TV Paint actually has a stencil feature which works much like a clipping mask, but you will activate the stencil on the layer that you want to reference, and then you make a new layer above and you start drawing. So you can either draw only on the area that you've drawn on the previous layer, or you can draw everywhere except those areas. So it's kind of like a stencil and then a reverse or inverse function. But because this was a basic tutorial, and again, some other software wouldn't have that feature, I decided that I was just gonna lock the transparency for this layer and draw the line work over the top of the same layer. I would not normally do it this way, but for the sake of that tutorial, like the first basic tutorial that I was doing, it made sense. Now, the next topic that I struggled with this was where to place the shadow on the head and how to get it look good as the head turned. I was pretty pleased with most of this, like just filling in the eyes with the line work brush. Easy enough, super simple. Until it got to the point where I was trying to get the pupil to look in the same direction as the other eye. So that took quite a lot of tries, but in the end we got there. In the later section of lining this character, I actually removed one of the hair flipping bits from the side as the ball bounced to the right, and I got rid of the line, I got rid of a bit of the ball because it just looked a lot better and it hid things a little bit more to make a smoother transition as well. Finally, the lining and colouring was done, and we got to my favourite part, which is adding texture. It's very much pick a colour, add it in, mess about with the blending modes and see whether you like it or not. Now, depending on the colour palette, I'll usually go for a purple for shadows and a yellow for highlights. Red will sometimes add a bit of saturation to the design, and then I will constantly mess about with the opacity and other blending modes to see if there's any other combinations that I like better. Add is great for adding highlights and showing where the lighting is. And then with this one, I also used a red with a subtract blending mode on about 20%, just to get this shadowed area, because the purple wasn't working very well. And this was the final result. So I hope you enjoyed this rambling walkthrough of this process and that it was helpful in some way. If you have any questions or if there's something else you'd like to ask me, let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back with another video real soon. Bye!